Welcome everybody to another Our Equity webinar. Today we are discussing a very important topic and also have in our midst some wonderful expertise on the matter. So today we are addressing a webinar entitled Checking Our Vitals, the Impact of Racism and Coloniality in Medical Education. And as you can hear from that title, this is a very, very important topic and also overdue discussion that needs to be had. And so I'm going to be in conversation with Dr. Leila Faker, who I will introduce. She is a medical doctor and health advocate from Cape Town. She graduated with an MB-CHB at Stellenbosch University in 2018. She's currently based in Southern Gauteng for community service and works in primary healthcare and HIV/TB. Her main areas of interest are women's health and public health. Welcome, Dr. Faker.
Well, so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. And like you said, it is very, very long overdue.
Absolutely, and so when creating the webinar series, of course, there were multiple conversations that had already been had. But when creating the series, we really thought about when we talk about health, public health, the medical profession, what are the kinds of things that in terms of how people think about the profession do not always make it to the conversation. And not only in the medical profession in general in South Africa, I think there's a big discomfort and reluctance to address, the social and historical legacies that are attached to the professions that we operate in. But in South Africa particularly, we know that the medical profession has not escaped unscathed from the tentacles of apartheid and colonialism. And I think those legacies, they persist as they do in all other spheres of society. And they're difficult to kind of untangle. But nevertheless, it's one thing to think about things and understand how legacies and histories sort of filter into today. But I think there's an important conversation then to have about how those legacies and histories impact real people today. It's not just an idea. It's not just a thought. These legacies and histories actually still have consequences for people today. And when they're seeking health services, when they are in need of help from medical professionals, often, they don't get it, and it gets put down to some kind of mythical idea of this is just the way things are, or there's nothing we can do. But in fact, it's been orchestrated to be that way, And so that is the inspiration for this conversation today. So perhaps maybe we can start off with you, and I think it's quite great that we have a young doctor that is willing to talk about this, because I do think, as time goes by, people often get quite comfortable in their roles and their lives, and they don't want to rock the boat too much. So I think it's quite useful that we have somebody that is definitely still in the phase of rocking the boat and won't stop anytime soon. So perhaps I can start you off with giving a little bit of a perspective into how you found, and also being educated in medicine at a university like Stellenbosch. We've literally just weeks ago had another heinous racist incident come out of Stellenbosch, another institution that has been the bedrock of white supremacy for this country for a very long time, and still in many ways is. So perhaps give us a snapshot of your experience of undergoing medical education and training in Stellenbosch.
Okay, so first I want to talk about a little bit about me, as a person. Sure. So I didn't grow up in Cape Town. So I grew up in Umtata, rural Eastern Cape, little town. So I was a minority, and I feel like I grew up in a space where like my teachers were Black, my friends were Black, like hearing people speak Xhosa and Zulu was normal for me. And then when I went to, so like that was like the baseline, like this was what South Africa was to me. And obviously I'd go to Cape Town like on holiday, my family's from there, I even sound Cape Townian. I've been there for about 10 years now. But like the first language that I spoke was isiXhosa. I didn't spend most of my day with my mom. My mom was working. So when I learned to speak, it was not English. My mom was very confused. And when I started going to school, I would like my primary language was isiXhosa. So when I started going to school, I was told that I shouldn't speak that language. So I had to learn English at school. And I know it sounds really strange, but like when I would go home, but at home we stopped speaking Xhosa. Like my mom's also like fluent. She's also another Malay woman, but speaks like the most beautiful Xhosa that like it's actually like really stunning to me. And she still speaks it now. And then she had to sort of like teach me how to speak better English at home. So when I went to school, I wouldn't get into trouble. And like that, and I think it was still like late 90s, early 2000s when I started going to school, or like play school. And then like I obviously learned English and I was told don't speak that language. And even my Black friends, we would all now talk amongst ourselves at break time, but like in class we now speak English. And I think that was the first time I'd actually faced being told, or just faced a scenario where I was told that like sort of Blackness or I don't know, being a person of color wasn't okay, even though I was in like the Eastern Cape. And then I went to school, obviously learned English and Afrikaans. My primary school did not offer isiXhosa like at all. And I was just like, I didn't understand it, but I'm like, okay, like we're here to like learn English and Afrikaans, new languages. And then I went to high school, and then everything was turned on its head. It's like everybody's speaking Xhosa, everybody gets to be more themselves. Whereas my primary school was a different experience. And then when I was in high school, it was a little bit more like progressive or whatever term you want to use for it. And then I was like, okay, like this is what like school and like my life is supposed to look like. I was like, okay, let me apply to universities, apply to most of the universities for med school. And then I got in at UCT and at Stellenbosch. And then I was like, most of my family's at UCT, like let me rock the boat and then go to Stellenbosch. So I went there, and obviously in the first week you do like orientation, signing up for university. And I remember sitting in the stadium, like, because it's a big stadium, all the first years are there. And I was just like, I struggled to find people who looked like me. Like, not even a Malay person, but like a person of color. It was just like everything was Afrikaans, everything sounded Afrikaans, like the little shorts and the Havianas, like it just looked and felt very, I don't feel like I was in South Africa. It's like that's even a thing. And like interspersed, you'd find like the other people of color. And my first friend, Rushda, we're still friends today, we sort of found each other in the sea of like, I don't know, like whiteness or caucasity. And we just found each other and we sort of bonded on the fact that like we weren't Afrikaans speaking. We didn't have blonde hair. And she was actually one of my friends, like up to graduation. We were really quite close. And we often like joke about that day, how we had to like find our people. And like I think that was they've always been like these like really, I don't know, really sort of subtle but very like molding events that happen where I'm just like, oh, okay, so I am definitely a person of color. When I went to university, so our first year, everything was in English. So I was like, okay, like this is fine. And I went to university. But the other thing that like really struck me in first year was when everybody was like sort of discussing how they got in for med school. And the one thing that I run an Instagram page called the Medstagram, where I talk about like my struggles throughout med school and through medicine, like how, like what my experience was like. And I remember people discussing like how many distinctions they got, what they did to get into med school. And I felt really out of place because I didn't get straight A's. I wasn't like that super like distinguished, full colors honor roll student. I was just like a little bit above average, didn't get an A for maths. I was very much like a cultural, sporty person. And I think that's why Stellenbosch specifically selected me. And like in their selection process, they want a well-rounded person, so they look at like your cultural activities. So like I think those are the things that made me sort of stand out a little bit. And I remember this one girl saying in like in our little chat, she was just like, oh no, my boyfriend got like straight A's and he couldn't even get into med school because, you know, he's not black. And I'm just like, but that I mean I get it, but and I know that you think it, but you're saying it out loud. And I was just like, it was so striking to me because I'm like, you live in an African like country where the majority of the people here are black or people of color. Like, what gives you the right to be like, just because I worked hard, I deserve to have a space here? I mean, if we were talking about like spaces and like a place where you should be, where your ancestors from, bro, like go there. But obviously I was like 18 and like I didn't have that kind of like, I don't know, confidence to say. But like a lot of the time, you know that something is wrong and you don't always understand it. So like at 19 and at 18, I'm like, these things, some of them don't make sense to me. And I'm like, I didn't grow up like this, so this doesn't match the way that I think or like the way that I've experienced life. And over the years, people have asked me like, oh, how did you get in for med school? Like, you're Indian, or like, are you colored, or are you Malay? Because they have so they have like the sort of like reflection system. So like the year that you apply for medicine needs to, like the amount of races need to reflect the population. So then they're like, oh, did you sign up as an Indian, or did you sign up as other, or as colored? And I'm like, Malay, colored, I guess. And it was such a thing for people, like especially like brown people, to discuss. And obviously at med school there's a big sort of like section of like Malay, colored, Indian students, and you all sort of like band together. And even like within our little group, people would discuss like how they got in, and they were like, oh no, I signed up as colored, and like clearly are Indian. And it was just like very striking about how, even though like a I don't know, ethnically colored person deserved to be there, like you decided to like dribble the system to get here. So little subtle things that I've like obviously noticed over the years, and like now I'm reflecting and I'm like, this is just people who are trying to look for an advantage and to just like step over the rules that are in place to put people who were previously disadvantaged in a place of like power, like still gets trampled over. And it's because like the thing is like you see it, but like how do you change it? Like how do you change somebody's mind about like the way that they think? Because you don't just, I mean, even with like the whole Stellenbosch thing where that student like urinated on that other child's homework, you don't just wake up and decide, I hate Black people. Like that's not something that happens. It's something that's like learned and cultured and just like sort of woven into who you are as like your life progresses, and like the things that like you're socialized to doing, and like your impacts, and like where you go to school, and like where you go to shop, and what you eat, and the type of things that you consume, and what's spoken about at the dinner table, like those things, those little things, like that's where a lot of the problems come from. And like it's things that you neglect and like brush over. So that was, so like those were the couple of times where I was like in sort of getting into med school. I think one incident that like actually shaped the way that I think about myself in medicine was, I think I was like in final year or fifth year, And we had clinics to go to, but there were fewer clinics than students, but the clinic space was very small. And I was just like, let's make this fair and equitable for everybody. We have 3 clinics, we have 42 students. We'll make a roster and like schedule people in for different days so everybody can go to the clinics, everybody can get the same exposure. Yeah, so let's do that. And everyone was like super on board with it. It was great. And on my day that I had to go to the clinics, there were these like 2 people who did not belong there, and I verified that they didn't belong there. They were at the clinic. So I'm like, yo, like, what are you guys doing here? They're like, no, I want to graduate with like cum laude, so like you better, like, you shouldn't, yeah, like just pretend like we weren't here. And I'm like, but you are here, like this is not your day to be here. And they were like, no, you can't, you have no say over this. Like, you, just because you made the roster doesn't mean like you have the authority here. And I'm like, it's not that I have the authority, like we all agreed that let's make this fair, that everybody has an equal chance. So I posted in the WhatsApp group, I'm like, hi guys, X and Y were at the clinics today, and it was like, it's really unfair. So if anybody wants to take their spot on like Thursday, please be welcome to. And everybody was like in agreement. They were like, okay, like X and Y, you guys just like should sit at clinics on that day. And after campus, I was like sitting outside, like on a bench, and I was like reading and like playing on my phone, like doing like regular student things. And this guy, one of the 2, had come to me and he was just like, who do you think you are? You can't stop me from getting like a cum laude. And like you, and it was like, I've checked your marks online before, and you're not as smart as me. You'll never be as smart as me. My parents are X, Y, and Z in like whatever division of the university, and we can make your life hell. And just very threatening. I was like, I don't know. And I was so scared. And I was just like, because like there's this big burly Caucasian man like towering over me and yelling. And I'm just like, you've done this to somebody else before. And like that was very triggering. And I was like, obviously at the time, like nobody speaks, like my parents don't speak to me like that. So I'm just like, why are you doing this? Like what? Like you're doing something that's unfair. You're putting people at a disadvantage. Like own up to it and like take your punishment. So the next day, and there were like people who had seen him like harass me at university. He was like, you shouldn't come to clinics tomorrow, like you're gonna like catch it from me and like whatever. And I'm pretty sure he was about to hit me, and my friend like ran from like the one side of the university to come and sit next to me. And I'm just like, this is so wild. So the next day I went to the VC, I went to the registrar to the VC, and I was like, look, this guy had harassed me. And do you know what they did to me? Nothing. They didn't offer me any help, any kind of like remediation. Like then they sent me an email saying that I should sit in a room so we can like discuss what happened. I'm like, this man like assaulted me or was near to assaulting me or harassed me, like whatever label you want to put on it. He did something wrong, and I had to feel like I was the person who did something wrong. And it was so close to exams, and never actually pursued it. But like in hindsight, like this person thinks that he can like intimidate people. Like this man is going to be somebody's doctor. Like, what if a patient doesn't agree with his management plan? Is he going to tower over them and like shout at them? Like, and I was just like his peer. I am sort of equal to him on a level. But if somebody's like at a disadvantage or underprivileged, or he doesn't see as an equal, like how is that person going to be treated? And I was like reading this tweet the other day about how every single doctor and med student knows somebody who should not be there because of like either behaviors or demeanor or just like unethical practices or whatever it is. We all know somebody that shouldn't be there but are there, and like there's no proper like vetting system. Like you don't know that somebody's going to react in a way, and it's just like, so like the things that happen are just like so subtle, but like they just like sort of like come out in these bursts, and then you're just like, whoa, like what are we paying attention to or not paying enough attention to? And those are like the standout things where race and like medicine have like intersected for me. And like those are like definitely like the standouts in like the beginning and like the sort of middle-ish bit of my career.
So I think one of the important things that came out of what you were speaking about was, number one, the realization also that yes, medical education and sort of the way in which it's executed has got racism and coloniality embedded in it, but it is but a it's but one part of a journey that already exists, right? So it makes itself um, a welcoming place for people who already have these ideologies, and,
Mm,
and and in fact also makes it easy for people like that to move through the system,
mm,
because there's no real sort of, and again, this is something that can be said for other disciplines as well. But I mean, in South Africa, we do have this problem of, like you say, there's a history of certain people being advantaged, being given an advantage over others, and then there's a system put in place to try and correct that. And the people who were previously advantaged now seem to find new ways to manipulate that system to keep
yeah,
them at an advantage. And so you then go into a program that is already welcoming of that is already ignoring things like malpractice, if you will, before you even get to practicing as a doctor. As a student, that's already laying the ground for malpractice.
mm,
um, and you then, so it's welcoming. It doesn't value accountability.
mm,
It in fact is also geared towards making environments and experiences for those who are disadvantaged so unbearable that I suppose the hope is that they might just give up and leave.
yeah,
um, and in so doing, they're making more space for those who the system already favored in the beginning.
yeah,
you know so thanks for that. And then, I mean, if we were to think about then, so these are the kinds of people who now graduate and become
mm,
doctors, and they've been given a particular kind of education. um, let's talk about the ways in which you know racism is, it manifests, but then is also encouraged by the way that medical education is set up. I do remember when we were talking about this in preparation for this webinar, you spoke to me about a particular dermatologist who wrote about identifying particular skin conditions that without a particular lens cannot be identified on darker skin. And that
mm.
in itself is a manifestation of racism, you know.
Racism.
And also just the lack of interest or motivation to innovate. If this is a problem, the lack of motivation to innovate and create solutions that solve the problem because it appears on a darker skin. Um,
Mm.
so, I mean, maybe take me through your thoughts around that, and then also if you have other kinds of concrete examples of how you've seen racism manifest in clinical practice.
Mm. So, like with that example specifically, I thought it was so interesting because I've also, through my medical school or like my medical career, I'm like, this doesn't always look like this on me or like somebody who's like a person of color. And I think like when I initially like saw the dermatology review, I think it was a med student who wrote a book on just like clinical presentations on people of color. And I'm like, it took a med student to do this. Like, we're the professors, like, we are the very learned, like, super specialists. Like, we are, like, they're supposed to be the people that, like, we hold into, like, such high regard of, like, doing the research and, like, doing the work and, like, doing the work to educate, like, us, like, the sort of junior doctors. And it's just it just, like, that also, like, struck me. And, like, the other thing is, like, when you are in clinical practice, and like this is something that I noticed like in med school, is that medicine is this airy fairy, like first do no harm, we're here to help, why do you want to become a doctor? To help people. And like the intention is so pure, like there is a sick person here and you would like to make them better. Like if that was like the basis for medicine, it would be like this really lovely, wholesome, like just like 1+1=2 type of situation. But unfortunately, medicine isn't that way. Like specific, like I don't know, forms of racism. I remember having my first OSCE, so like that's like your clinical examination. So you basically like see a patient and like you discuss this patient with the consultant. And one of the things that happens before you have your OSCE, like your clinical examination, is you find out who your examiner is. So it's usually like a specialist or a super specialist. And the Caucasian, like white kids, were never scared like of whoever they got, but the doctors or like the students of color, you'd need to know, because you also would need to know how far in advance you need to prepare, what kind of questions they were going to ask you, what's that doctor's area of specialty. Because even though you were a third year, very minimal clinical skills, very minimal, your abilities to like piece like the puzzle together and like come up with a diagnosis, or like your thought pattern of medicine is very different. But you always felt like you had to do more and like to impress these doctors, and you had to like show up. And one of my very close friends, Zainab, she told me, they decide your mark as soon as you walk in, and it's like this show of I am smart and I am capable and I do deserve to be here, rather than, okay, this is the checklist, like these are the requirements for this person to pass. They need to come up with like, find the clinical science, and I come up with a formulation and I come up with a diagnosis. But you do all of that, but you have to put in so much effort to prove your worth. And it was something that her and I like had discussed like through medicine. She's like really one of the smartest people I know, and even she had a tough time. Like every time we had an OSCE, we'd have to like talk each other down. I'm like, you know what, like you are worthy, like even though you're not going to get the marks that you deserve, you will get through this degree, like you will get through your 6 years, inshallah, like in the way that you're supposed to. And like once you get over that hurdle, like you get to decide like the kind of doctor you want to be, the kind of impact that you want to make on people's lives. Because med school is rough. You have like these little short stints of like learning all of these like very specialized things and then just moving on. And you never really get a break, because from like your first year, from my first year up to now, I've only had one break. And like that's like that was sort of imposed on me because there wasn't enough funding in like the Department of Health. So I had to take 7 months off. But even in that time, like you're forced to always do more, and like you can't lose your clinical skills, you can't lose out. Whereas like other people who I knew who were unemployed at the same time just sat at home. And like I think it's always like that like, I don't know, like that inner motivation to just like not be a failure. Because during med school, even when we'd be on ward rounds, and then the doctor would like ask a question, and then he'd be like, okay, you with the button shirt, like what is like one of the signs of asthma? And I could give an answer that would be correct, and he'd be like, okay, good. And then and that would be fine. But then you'd get another person of color maybe giving an answer that was wrong, and this person would get like berated. You don't deserve to be in medical school, like this is not a place for you. Maybe if you study from today till your final year, maybe you'll be worthy. And you get like another girl with like another student who'd be given a wrong answer, and they were like, oh no, maybe you should like think about that a little bit more. So the people that you face and like the way that they treat you definitely shape your idea of like what medical school would be like. I remember most of my rotations I had, my heads of department were not people who looked like me, who were not Malay or black or colored, but they were white. And they'd been in their heads of department roles for a while, not taking away any of like their hard work or like accolades that they've like gained throughout getting to their position, but I just always felt like they didn't look like me. And in my final year, I did a rotation at Kailicha Hospital, and my doctor, well, the specialist that I worked with, looked like me, spoke like me, was gentle, understood that it was Ramadan, and sometimes I was going to be a little bit late, or that I'd be a little bit slow, like to work in the afternoons. Like just these little cultural understanding things like made such a big difference for me. And like from then I was just like, I really want to work with people who look like me and sound like me in the future. I also want to be in a place where I am a safe space in medicine for people, or like even female doctors. Because like just I think as women we're very like shy, and like we don't really like step into our power and like want to be like in the limelight, or like be in places where we can be where we can expose ourselves, because like if exposing yourself like opens yourself up to vulnerability. And like people in like our day and age are not the kindest, like cancel culture and like just targeting and like atting people. It's not easy. So maybe one of the reasons why people who look like me are like sort of shy away from leadership positions, because like they have their own trauma, especially when it comes to being a person of color, or being a woman. And yeah, like I said like before, race and race always comes into it. As much as like medicine is a wholesome profession, my rotations are always mirrored by who was teaching me and like who I was interacting with. So when my even my clinical groups, were more people who looked like me, I felt more comfortable making mistakes. And if I gave her like the wrong answer, I wouldn't feel so stressed about it. But like if my seniors were like different to me, I've always felt like I had to do more, and it wasn't easy. So yeah, when it comes to like, and like also like the way we're like going back to the way that we're taught. So we're taught medicine in a very like Caucasian white gaze, like as we spoke about, like with the dermatology student and like the book that he wrote. But when you're in the clinics or when you're in the hospital, most of our patients are Black and colored and maybe Congolese, Zimbabwean. They are not the pink skin with the lesions on that you see. So like our education doesn't always mirror what we see clinically. And we obviously like have to, once you're like in the medical system and then you're learning things, you're like, okay, so this is what medicine is actually like. It's not whatever was on the PowerPoint. And the other thing that I also noticed about med school is a lot of people would get like annoyed when our patients wouldn't speak English or Afrikaans. It was always very striking to me, because I'm just like, I'm from like Umtata, like I speak Xhosa, like I can still speak it now. Like if I have a patient, it's not an issue. I mean, obviously I'm in Gauteng now. Learning Sotho has been like an uphill battle, but I still try. And you're kind of sort of taught Xhosa or Afrikaans in first year, but then they sort of dismiss it. Like we did our time, like we tried, kept it moving. And then when you get into clinical practice and your patient does not speak a lick of English or Afrikaans, then the students would get so annoyed. They'd be like, oh, try to find a sister who also speaks the same language, or would go to another Black person in the group and be like, oh, my patient's Black, can you please come and translate for me? I'm like, how? Okay, but like the person that you're speaking to is like Ghanaian. They don't speak Xhosa. Like little things, like, well, not the little things, actually like big things like that. Like you are at a university in a South African country. Why are you not taking the responsibility of learning a language? Like even though I only speak Xhosa, when I'm at work, I still like kind of use my Xhosa words. And then the patients are like so surprised and like so appreciative that I'm trying, like try. But yeah, people just don't want to. And it like really shows in like the way that they present themselves like as medical doctors, because you'll see the person who's like actively trying to be better. I mean, you're not going to be like 100% perfect, and like, but like the trying is the thing that makes the difference. Like a lot of the people that I went to university with, like, just don't try after a point like where it doesn't benefit them. They're just like, I'll find a way around it. And like a way, like one of the ways that like some of my colleagues would get around things would just be like trying to look at the notes and examining like really thoroughly, but like your experience of something might not show on like a physical aspect. So like I mean, maybe you'll have like a scar of something, and then you'll just go ahead and assume they're like, oh, like that was from like a stabbing because you're from like a rural area, and like that would just be like the notion that you go with. But then it might have been like, I don't know, like a childhood injury, like you fell and you hurt yourself. So even like things like assumptions that people make without having that conversation and like that language barrier, I don't think it is a language barrier. I think it's just like a lot of the time it's just like a lack of trying and just that the lack of effort. And like going back to like how language is so important. I'm like, it was fine only needing to know English and Afrikaans, living in Cape Town. But a lot of like my people that I've graduated with went to like Limpopo and Mpumalanga, and the languages there are just not Afrikaans. So if you went to Stellenbosch and like you took Afrikaans as a second language, going there and like needing to learn a second language and having to learn how to communicate in a new language must be so rough for you. And I really, really hope that it's a lesson that wherever you go, you just at least try to communicate with the people like of that area. And like these are like basic things that I mean, like the language somebody speaks and like the color of their skin, like surely these things shouldn't impact like healthcare, but they do. I mean, I see it myself, like most of my patients are Black Sotho speaking patients, but like on days when I really struggle, I know that the people that I work with will come and help me because I have made the effort from my part. It's not a given that, oh, I'm struggling to communicate with this patient, like Sisepeleng, like come and help me, or because she has her own work to do and I have my own role. And like we have to take responsibility for the roles that we're in. And just about like that whole accountability thing, like you go into this profession, it's not a very like glamorous, self-serving. I mean, yes, I'm like, oh, she's a doctor, like your parents must be so proud. I'm like, yeah, but like it's hard work and it's very emotional work, and like you give so much of yourself. Self-preservation is something that can be done, but like not often. And like if you're doing this job the way that you're meant to, or the way that you're taught to, it takes a lot from you. And you also sort of see a reflection of yourself in your patients. I'm like, do I treat the homeless patient the same way that I treat the patient who had medical aid and doesn't have medical aid now? And like doing that like introspection, and I'm like, are my own biases and like the things that I've learned, are they coming out in the way that I treat patients? And initially, yeah, that was a very tough conversation that I had to have with myself. But I'm very glad that I noticed that I used to treat different patients differently. And now I'm just like, okay, I need to be better and do better. Whereas other patients will just go through it. Other doctors will just go through it and like treat patients very differently, like forever. And I think that's why I'm so grateful for doing my community service in like a rural area in a place that's very far away from Cape Town, because I get to see like what communities in South Africa actually like, because like the Western Cape is not a true reflection of what South Africa is like. Gauteng and Limpopo and Mpumalanga maybe, but not the Western Cape. And resource-wise, I don't have the same things that I had there. Even our clinic, every day that I go to work, I'm just like, can I please have basic equipment and drugs? And I've been here 10 months and I haven't gotten like a single reply. Basic things like safety, not a thing. We have like 3 or 4 security guards on every night, but they are more afraid of the patients than we are. So I'm just like, am I really being protected? Some of the time, no. And like me trying to advocate for the patients, like emailing my head about like, we need these drugs. Like this is a way to improve like the quality of care that we give, and like I just get a no, or just like basically get ghosted. Like nobody messages me back. And I try really hard. Like I'm very junior. I'm also here temporarily. Like I have no stake in being here for very long, but like I also know that I need to leave this place in like a better state and in a sustainable, and like leaving the area in like leaving sustainable, like positive change. And in some ways I'm like, okay, like I feel like I'm making headway, but in some ways I'm just like, they won't listen to me because I'm like this junior doctor from like a different province and I'm going to leave. And because community service like goes on like this rotational phase where you're just here for a year and then you move on, it feels like, or like a lot of the permanent staff feels like, you're just here to like make yourself feel better and then like move on. So like our healthcare system like faces a lot of challenges, and junior doctors really do try to make a change. We do try to go out into the communities. We do try with what little that we can, but it's not always met with, okay, like let's do this. Like this is a positive thing. And like there are a lot of challenges, but like those are the ones that I like as a community service doctor that I'm like currently facing.
Yeah, and you know, it also just makes me think about how it actually came up in a previous webinar where somebody was talking about medical practice, clinical practice, and saying how doctors are often not taught. They're taught to see cases, not people. You know, and I think that yeah, and that's, I mean, it's mind-blowing to think about the fact that it's one of the professions that has human beings at the center of its you know, practice, and that's the way that the viewpoint is set up.
But so like just on that point, the reason why, and I've noticed it now. So when I still worked in like the Western Cape, I didn't have as many patients as I have here. So at home, I'd like see my patient, but I'd be able to spend time with them and I get to know them and like just level with them on like a more empathetic and like human to human level. Working in Gauteng, I see 40 patients a day. I have to have 40 interactions with like strangers. Like you meet me and you need to trust me. And I need to figure out what your biggest problem is so I can either solve it or sort of subdue it until it gets to a point where you can't handle it and it becomes an emergency or whatever the interaction needs to be. So like you're saying, where a doctor starts to see cases, I definitely have seen like that switch in myself working here, because I don't have that time to connect, because I'm just like, I need to see the next one, I need to see the next one, I need to see the next one, because it costs patients money to get to the clinic. Not all of them live in like walking distance. Some of them need to take like a taxi to get here. So like those are the other things that are like running at the back of my head. I'm like, as much as I know that you have other social issues going on right now, I would much rather deal with your medical thing and like solve the case and then send you to a social worker who can help you with the other things, rather, because I do know that I have the skills to solve your other problems. I just don't have the time. And that's like just another part of like, so like apartheid obviously like ruined our healthcare system, and we're sort of trying to pick up the pieces and trying to give people who didn't have access to healthcare previously and now have access but now don't know how to manage it or how to deal with it. So sometimes patients need to come to the clinic first before they go to the hospital. Other patients think, oh no, I'm very sick, so I need to go straight to the hospital, where whatever was wrong with them could have been managed at the clinic. And like just trying to reframe people's minds and like fix those parts of the sort of remnants or the effects of apartheid.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, so I mean, what you're talking about is also just it's it's a consequence of a poorly managed and poorly resourced healthcare sector, which is now an ongoing struggle. And we've also seen the effects of that, especially during, at least for those who are not on the in the inner circle of healthcare, we've seen the effects of that publicly play out during the pandemic. Um,
Mm,
and of course, we've known about it for a long time, and many of us have experienced the absolute, horror of what happens in public healthcare.
mm,
Again, it's a even that is a legacy of racism and colonialism that has set it up for us to now sit with a poorly functioning healthcare system,
mm,
and then of course now being led by people who have no political will to remedy that. So I mean,
yeah.
again, a system that feeds into itself and keeps replicating the same consequences over and over. But then to speak about that, to speak about consequences, so I mean, I think it's important to paint a picture also then of, because people can watch this and say, um, yeah, but I mean, what can be done? What do you expect? And doctors are overworked, and the healthcare system doesn't support anybody, and so this will happen. But let's talk a little bit about the actual consequences of what we've been talking about. Like you've spoken about not being able to, not having the time, to actually see people and see into people. You've spoken about the lack of effort put into, bridging cultural and linguistic divides. You've spoken about the inability to mirror what you learned in your training to what is standing in front of you. And then, so with all of that said, what are the consequences of this for people seeking medical care?
So when I was at university, or just like if you work in the health department, like even in the Western Cape itself, like I have most of my experience from working there. So you have like different sort of districts. So the way that I would like sort of split it out in my head was like the UCT part, so like the mountain and the beach, and then you'd have like the Stellenbosch section, which would be like from Goodwood that way, like into N1, like towards Stellenbosch Paarl. And you can see it in the service delivery, you can see it in the way that the hospital looks. Like if you've ever been to Groote Schuur, you know what Groote Schuur looks like. And have you ever been to Tygerberg Hospital? You would know from face value how different they look. The one is obviously way more funded. Even like the surrounding area is really nice. I mean, Groote Schuur is like in like Mowbray Observatory, like that area, and Tygerberg is like dead center in the middle of like Parow and Bellville. And like those are not very affluent areas. They don't have access to the CBD or to I don't know, like the pretty part of Cape Town. So obviously like a lot of the money and funding that goes into like the Western Cape Health, most of it goes into the area surrounding Groote Schuur. And you can see it in like the way that things look and the way that the experience that you get when you go to the Tygerberg Bellville district or area. Ravensmead, which is like a stone throw away from Tygerberg, has like the highest incidence of TB, or like it was like, or that was the statistic when I was at university. And like there are definitely more people who are in need of public healthcare services at the Tygerberg area than they are at the Groote Schuur area. But most of the funding will go there. And like, I mean, even the way that like Tygerberg Hospital looks on the inside, big parts of the hospital are shut down because like it can't be used. We don't have the nursing staff, we don't have facilities, or whatever issues are going on there. The hospital like looks very old and like dilapidated, has needed cash, like has gotten so many injections of like money to improve it over the years. And like it just, it hasn't like improved at all. And then you get like sort of the counterpart that's like improving, and like the Lung Institute and this research laboratory, and Tygerberg is catching up, and like Stellenbosch is catching up, but like it's nowhere on equal ground as like the other side. And like that's just like a very, I mean, it doesn't take like a rocket scientist to like see that there is a difference. So and like the spatial segregation as well, like the vast majority of like your sick underprivileged patients mostly go to Tygerberg. Cape Town is very, very, very good at, so when you come into a hospital, they're like, okay, proof of address, or where do you live? And they're like, you are not from our district. You do not get healthcare here. And they'll send you away. So like if you are, I don't know, from Belleville and you get into a car accident at Tygerberg, I mean, like, I don't know, close to the waterfront, you will get stabilized and like done all, have most of your emergency management done. But at some point, like they will send you back to whence you came. And it just feels very, still gives me like these feelings of like segregation. So yeah, like those are like, it's something that's always sort of stood out to me when it comes to like the management of patients. The other thing that sort of like stands out about like just colonialism on medicine, and I don't know if like this is a niche experience of my own, but I know that it's been discussed like over the years, is we have a lot of foreign students or like from other countries, mostly like global north, who come to South Africa to gain experience. And the intention's like really good. Like we have very high incidences of like trauma. We have very like vast types of like diseases that we're exposed to. But part of me always thinks that like these students or like doctors come here to like gain their experience on like our people. And like these are underprivileged people of like our country. And like our underprivileged people are not like experiments for you to learn on. Like these are real people. And there's a lot of like ethical questions that come into there, like, okay, these are students, like these are not trained medical doctors who are now attempting to treat these patients. These are just students from other countries who don't understand our like cultural backgrounds, don't speak the language, just want to perform a procedure, and then what? And like these are very vulnerable, underprivileged people who don't always have, who are most of the time very grateful for medical treatment, that they don't actually understand what like consent is and like what their rights are in a situation. And there's no recourse for them. Like if they feel like, you know, they were mishandled, or they were not like the procedure wasn't properly explained to them, like who do they complain to? Because they came to the hospital, they got treatment, they had investigations done, but like at what cost? And like we don't know what the cost is to the patient. Like they're just very appreciative to get free healthcare. And like that's like one of like the trade-offs like that they make, that we're not always very aware of, because we're just like, we work here, we get paid at the end of the month, they come here for free healthcare, like they shouldn't complain. But they're people too, and like they have like lives and families and aspirations and like fears, and like those things are not always discussed. And unfortunately we don't always give them the space to. And like remember the thing that I said about time, they turn into cases, or they turn into a number on the list, or they turn to a, I don't know, bed 4B in room 3. And like those are the other sort of remnants of like colonialism. I remember during med school, everybody's just like, oh, what are you going to do for your elective? And like people would want to go to Rwanda to give pads to the underprivileged, I mean, the girls at like whatever school, so they could go to school, because they weren't going to school because of period poverty. And I'm like, okay, fine, the intention's there, but where's the sustainability? Like, how do you account for your 6 weeks here? Fine, you're like doing something great, like nobody's taking that away from you, but then what? what happens after the 6 weeks. Okay, this girl gets to go to school for 2 months, and then, I mean, the rest of a period, the rest of a school journey, like, we don't think past like the point that, like, this is what I said earlier, a lot of people don't think past the point that serves them. And unfortunately, like, that's just like, that's just the way that some people think. And medicine is supposed to be like this really great, like, selfless profession, but because we're so run down and so burnt out that you start just being like, okay, how do I benefit from like the situation? And you forget that your patients are also people. And yes, it's like very unfortunate. And like you were speaking about, like, the access to healthcare. Prior to apartheid, like, people of color had access to healthcare, but it was like very sparse and like very limited. And now you get patients who can just walk into a clinic and get healthcare. And a lot of the doctors are like, when I first moved to this district, I was like, oh my gosh, like, this place is so busy. Like, every single call, I don't see less than 40 patients. Like, I have so many transfers and so many referrals. And I'm just like, I am the only doctor in like a 20-kilometer radius tonight. And I'm like, it shouldn't be like this, but this is what it is. And I'm like, these people come to the clinic for like the smallest, like, I have a vomit or a cough for 2 days. But like, we don't stop and think, we're like, these people have probably, like, I mean, like, 30 years ago, were not able to just walk into a clinic and get healthcare. They had to wait for a certain time, or there would be no healthcare for them. They just have to be like sick at home until the clinic opens in the day from like 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock. So as much as like the healthcare burden is on you, you're just like, if you like stop and think about it, I'm like, these people probably have not been like cared for, like, healthcare wise, like, for a very long time, or maybe never. And now they have the opportunity to come to the clinic. Like, it's your responsibility to give them the best kind of care that you can with what you have. And it was like a shift that I had to do, like, for myself, because when I first moved, I was like very much about like, why are there so many people, so many in like so many places, like, they just don't stop. And then when I sat and like I thought about it, and I just took a look at like the 20-minute drive I have to take into like this rural area every day. I'm like, these people don't have, like, they can't even afford to buy a 2-pack of Panado. Like, a 2-pack of Panado is like, what, 6 rand? They literally have to walk from, I don't know, for like 7 kilometers to get to me, spend like 20 minutes with me, where I will do my best to help you, and like, you'll get your medication for free. And as broken and as annoying and as burdensome as the healthcare system is, it's one of the things that I'm so happy for, like, in South Africa, where if you have diabetes, you can go to the clinic and get your management for free. Whereas like places like America, you have to pay so much money. You will literally go into debt because you have a non-communicable disease. And as underprivileged and under-resourced and under whatever word you want to put with it, like, it's something that I'm grateful for, that our patients get to have like some of like the best healthcare. So a lot of like our consultants and like senior specialists at our hospitals are leaders in their field, and like, these are the people that are training our doctors, our future doctors. Like, these are people who are trying to go further and like making like the medical South more robust and like more educated, and like just giving us the skills to, you know, share with future generations, and giving our patients like very, very like evidence-based care, and like the best care. So there's always like, for every positive, like, there's always going to be a negative. And as horrible as the after effects of apartheid are, the positives of like free healthcare and like the access to healthcare for all is such a good thing. I mean, even access to like HIV treatment in South Africa, it's so robust and like so well, like the nurses and the doctors are so well trained in it, that if you work in like public health, there's no way that you've never encountered HIV. There's no way that you don't know how to manage it. And like, I think that in itself is amazing, because if you have to go to, I don't know, America or the US, managing HIV doesn't come like first nature. You don't know what to look out for. You don't know what the side effects on the medication are, or what other opportunistic infections go with it. Like, it's just very new. And because of our disease burden, our doctors are so confident, and like they're so educated, and like they just, I mean, we practice very active management of patients, where in other countries it's very like conservative, like let's do this test and like let's do this investigation, where South African doctors are very like astute clinicians, where you can examine a patient and like use your clinical acumen and be like, okay, this is my breakdown of what I think is wrong with the patient, and then move on to special investigations. And it does make like very confident, like an amazing doctors, but we shouldn't be pushed to be this confident and this amazing with like such little resources.
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful note to round this conversation up with. And it reminds me of, of a statement that I made in my lecture at UCT on Thursday, which was, there are still opportunities for redemption. And I think it's important to hold on to that, especially when we think about the efforts that doctors continue to make even under the worst of circumstances. And it's important not to be ignorant to the challenges that are being faced, but also equally important not to be consumed by despair. So Dr. Leila Faker, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity of thought and sharing your experiences. I think this conversation has offered, some insights into what goes into the making of a doctor, and some of those things are good things, and some of those things are bad things. But I think it's important for us to be aware of all of this when we look at a complete snapshot of our public health sector, and the people that are carrying it, the people that contribute to its demise, but also the people who contribute to its, sustainability. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I think conversations like this, I don't do them often, but like when I do speak to people who are interested in like my perspective, especially as somebody as like a junior doctor, it's always nice, because the people sort of speaking out for us are people who've been in the game for like quite some time, and like we're still fresh and new out of university, but like also entering like the job market and like finding out where we fit. And the more we speak about things, like the more conversations we have, and like the more people that we reach, and like our future, or like the future of medicine, and like what it looks like, and like the way we impact our patients and each other, we can impact each other positively. Like, it doesn't have to be this very heavy, sort of dark, just like I don't know, this area of like despair. And like you said, like there's always an opportunity for redemption, but like it also speaks to us recognizing like where our biases are, where our shortcomings are, and like admitting to the fact that things like apartheid and racism and colonialism do have an impact on like healthcare, like just in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think this has made an invaluable contribution to the series about, the social aspects that impact public health. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful day further, and also all the best for you and your patients.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.